Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. I love seeing where everybody's from. So, Seattle folks, Sacramento folks, DC, and then, of course, my beloved New Jersey. I'm in San Diego, California. And today I have the great honor of speaking to you about lessons learned over 15 years in both the federal and state government levels about human-centered design. And so you might have heard of human-centered design, you might be interested in it, you might be curious about it. And my goal today is to share stories of lessons learned from working on the Cancer Moonshot back in 2016 under Vice President Biden in the Obama White House. My hope today is that you walk away with at least one thing you can go back and do today or tomorrow or next week in your job. I've tried to make it as easy as possible. So I'm going to go through 6 lessons that I've reflected on over the years of working on Cancer Moonshot. And then in a number of those sections, I talk about what human-centered design method I used. I'm going to tell you why I used it. I'll tell you the materials you need. And then I'll also give you a very high-level description of how to go through and do it yourself. I've also linked out. There used to be an organization called 18F that was started under President Obama and the General Services Administration. I was part of that team. And I'm going to link out to their method cards. So even though that organization no longer exists and their website has been taken down, because they did all their work transparently and in the open, they had everything on GitHub. So there's a group of former 18F employees who have put those method cards in an accessible spot. So we'll make sure to get that out to you because that's a treasure trove of a step-by-step how to go through and do things. And I want to make sure you've got some great takeaways from this talk today. So if that sounds good, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started. So hello, I'm Kara Fitzpatrick. I worked in the Obama White House. I worked in the Biden-Harris White House. I also had the great honor of going to Sacramento for the first 100 days of the pandemic and working with Governor Newsom and his team, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Mark Ghaly, and just an incredible cadre of wonderful, brilliant, dedicated state civil and career servants in Sacramento. And so I'm currently in San Diego. For those of you who aren't, I'm so sorry. It's a beautiful day. It's 72 and sunny like it always is. But we'll move past that because I know I was in Colorado last week and I got snowed on. So I saw somebody from Boulder in the chat. Welcome to you as well. So what is the Cancer Moonshot and what were the lessons in human-centered design that came out of it? Let's start with President Obama telling you about the moonshot.
Last year, Vice President Biden said that with a new moonshot, America can cure cancer. Last month, he worked with this Congress to give scientists at the National Institutes of Health the strongest resources that they've had in over a decade. Well, so tonight I'm announcing a new national effort to get it done. And because he's gone to the mat for all of us on so many issues over the past 40 years, I'm putting Joe in charge of mission control. For the loved ones we've all lost, for the families that we can still save, let's make America the country that cures cancer once and for all. What do you say, Joe? Take it out. Last year.
So here's the funny part about that story. It wasn't actually until that moment in the State of the Union that Vice President Biden knew he was going to be in charge of the moonshot. So that's an actual genuine reaction you see from him. And so how did I get involved, right? Because I was at 18F at the time. I got a phone call from the vice president's director of digital. So she handles all of his online, social media and digital accounts. And she said, we're looking for a creative technologist. And, somebody gave me your name. And at the time, I was actually up on the Hill taking a class that Georgetown offers called How Congress Works, which was a very actually interesting class. And I had a lot of questions. But, we talked through it. What could it look like? How could I be most helpful? And what I said to her at the end of the call was, Lindsay, I wasn't born to do this work. I survived to do this work. And we decided on the spot that I would come over to the White House from 18F on detail to work on the moonshot. And the reason I said I would survive to do this work is because I'm a 3-time cancer survivor. And not only was this opportunity incredibly meaningful for me personally, but professionally to be able to scrub in on something so large. In fact, after the State of the Union, I tweeted, "Let's make America the country that cures cancer once and for all." And I quoted President Obama, and I commented and said, "This three-time cancer survivor cannot agree more. Thanks, POTUS, for the Affordable Care Act." And so I went over to the White House. The Cancer Moonshot team was set up. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Eisenhower Executive Office building. It's a very old building next to the White House. It's very large. When you're starting a new initiative this late in the presidency, so we were there for the final year of the Obama administration, there's not a lot of room left. So we were tucked in a corner on the top of the 5th floor, and we got to work immediately. There was 10 of us on the team. I was director of experience design. And, the first week I tried to figure out the strategy for that. What does it look like to design with people? What does it look like to make sure as many voices are heard and participating throughout this process? Because we had an 11-month deadline. We didn't know who was going to win the presidency in 2016, meaning who would take office in 2017. So if you've ever worked on a project that has a very tight turnaround within a semi-ambiguous ending, this was it. So I made my goal as director of experience design to connect the moonshot to the people. And that gave me a very broad ability to figure out the best way to do that. And some of it was through user experience and human-centered design. Some of it was through digital, launching the Cancer Moonshot Medium publication, where we brought in the voices of everyday people to publish their stories so we could connect with them. And so today I'm going to go through 3 or 6 lessons in human-centered design. The first lesson is humanize the effort. And so what does it mean to humanize something so large as the government, cancer, and bureaucracy? Well, I knew that I wanted to hear from the people who had already reached out to the president and vice president. And so one of President Obama's rituals, so every day he gets a briefing book that is put together by a brilliant team in the White House, and it tells him everything he needs to know for the next day. And one of the things they did is they would reach out to the Office of Presidential Correspondence, who every day their job was to go through tens of thousands of emails and letters and incoming feedback from the public to the President of the United States. And what that team does is they know what his priority pillars are, and they pull 10 letters total every day that come into the president, and they line those up to his top priorities, and then 10 of those letters go in his briefing book. And it is a beautiful thing. Sometimes he will respond directly with a note. Sometimes he'll put a note on it and send it out to the person who's actually responsible and really close to the topic at the White House. Sometimes he'll reach out to a cabinet member. If it's a letter that comes in, let's say from a veteran, he'll send it out to the Secretary of the VA. But it's inspiring. And so I used that inspiration to humanize our effort on Cancer Moonshot. I reached out to the Office of Presidential Correspondence and I said, I want any letter that's ever been written in the past 7 years to the president or the vice president that has the word cancer in it. Now you can imagine I had to read a lot of letters. But that's okay because that was the point. So what I did every Monday, I got those letters, I read through them, and then every Monday from March until we left the following January, I would send a letter out to the Cancer Moonshot team. And I wanted to ground us every week in who we were here fighting for, who we were here trying to make a difference for. So that's something you can do, right? You can reach out, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But there's ways that you can get the public's feedback through things that already exist. So it's not always, human-centered design isn't always creating something new out of scratch. Sometimes you can take data that already exists. Here's one letter. It's a woman her name is Jennifer Bittner, and she reached out to President Obama. And she was diagnosed on April 2nd, 2014 at age 36 with stage 4 breast cancer. And in this letter, she says to him, the average life expectancy for stage 4 breast cancer is 3 years. 3 years. Ooh, I'm going to get emotional. Sorry. I'm not sorry. This is important. I have so much more to give this world than 3 years would allow. That's powerful. Now, unfortunately, we were able to work. The good news is we were able to work with Jennifer for a bit and talk with her. She did pass away not too long after this. But this is who we're here for. This is who we're serving. So I encourage you to think about who are the people you serve in your jobs and how are you connecting with them? How are you having conversations with them? How are you making sure their voice and their story is brought into your work to keep you focused on who you're solving for and what success looks like? So humanize the effort. Lesson one, how do you put that into action? So this method of user experience or user research is called desk research. It's you go out and you read articles, you pull letters, you look at feedback. The materials you'll need to do this, and again, this is a very high level, but it should get you directionally in the right idea of how to do it. Materials you'll need: document or a spreadsheet for note taking, for your outputs. You're going to need to find the feedback from the public. So it could be letters, it could be emails that were sent in. Your team likely has somebody who's responsible for receiving all that and having it and cataloging it. It could be a survey. Maybe you send out a survey to see what your people think. But again, hearing from people is important, listening to them, bringing their stories in. Why humanizing the effort is important? This powerful data brings your work to life. And it's grounded in people's lived experiences. So it's not, I heard it from a cousin who told my brother. These are the people directly giving you what they think. So how do you do it? One, find out which team, department, or person is responsible for receiving letters, emails, surveys from the public. We'll just call it feedback. Then ask if they can search that feedback and send you any mentions of the word or topic that you look at. If you work in the water department, for example, is anybody talking about leaks? Is anybody talking about overage charges or the bills? Like for me, like I said, I just said I wanted everybody with the word cancer. Then you're going to read through the feedback, look for themes across all of it, and keep an eye out, especially while you're looking for the themes. If there's a particular quote that catches your ear or catches your eye, write those down. Because just like I used a couple slides earlier, those are the things that'll really bring it to life and pack an emotional punch for people to remember. Because what we know is oftentimes people will not remember the data points that you use, but they will remember the stories. So keep a lookout for those really powerful quotes. So then you're going to dump the themes and the quotes into a working doc, either a Word doc or a Google Doc, whatever you are able to use in your workplace, and then organize those themes. So we had some that, I had a theme that this was from young people, this was from the Midwest. So you can cut that data in different ways. And then I always try to put the quotes near the top and tag, if there's a particular topic that's important. And then you want to share, most importantly, now you have it all, right? You've done the research, you found the themes, you have these awesome, powerful quotes. Now you want to share this with your project team or your department or people who it'll make a difference with, and use it in reports or briefs where appropriate. I can't drive home enough how important it is to bring the people in. So that's humanize the effort. Next up, this was a lesson I learned my first time in government in 2012 as part of the first class of Presidential Innovation Fellows. I was told on day one, hold on to your naivete. Now, what does that look like? Well, that means the fact that you don't know.
Really pretty awesome, because it means you get to ask a lot of questions. It is not a sign of failure or bad that you might not know the answer to something. It's great because you get to ask a lot of questions so that you can know. And let me just, because I just switched to my earbuds, let me go into the chat real quick. Can I get a thumbs up if everybody can still hear me? Yes. Oh, is it Tiziana? I apologize, but thank you for letting me know. All right, we're going to go back in. All right. Thank you for your patience, everybody. Okay, so hold on to your naivete. It is the most effective tool you've got. And so if you don't understand how something works, ask somebody to explain. When I was doing research on the cancer clinical trials, which was my focus area in the Cancer Moonshot, I would ask people, hey, why is the tool unusable? Or show me how you do this. And they'd walk me through it. And, usually the first answer you get is not the answers that the most useful. So you want to ask why 5 more times. Oh, it's not useful because you can't see it. Well, why can't you see it? Oh, and you start digging down. It's almost like spelunking in a cave. gets more interesting and more interesting and more interesting until you get an answer that's actually actionable. So for example, as part of our field research on Cancer Moonshot, we went to rural areas. We went to Indian reservations, to Navajo Nation. We went to Boston. We went to urban areas, suburban areas. We talked to over 250 people in our 2-month discovery sprint. And what we did is you're looking at a journey map right now, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. But what you do in a journey map is you ask somebody, hey, for this example, fill out your journey with cancer. And it usually starts with, here's the day I found out I got it. Here was my first doctor visit. And then underneath each of those milestones, how did you feel? What did you do? And so you really get a nice end-to-end picture. And remember, I told you one of the most powerful things you can do in human-centered design is pull out those powerful quotes for, basically being able to represent people's lived experiences. And this quote just, you could have knocked me over with a feather, folks. This woman said, telling someone they're not eligible for a clinical trial is very judgmental. I'd want a maximum amount of emotional empathy applied to the way you tell someone they aren't eligible. So what happens is, prior to this initiative, you would go onto trials.cancer.gov, you'd fill out a form, and it would just tell you you're not eligible. And for this person, she walked us through the process, and you could tell emotionally it hurt her because she wanted so badly to live and she wanted to fight. And there was no emotional empathy in that message. So think about your error messages you create on websites. Think about the notifications you send out to people, right? There's so many ways that you have touch points with the public. How are you applying emotional empathy to that? So after talking to 250 people, and we talked to doctors, nurses, caregivers, sidekicks. We talked to technology companies who were attacking cancer clinical trials. We talked to advocacy groups for cancer. We took all that aggregate data and we created a cancer patient journey map. And this hung in my office at the White House. And what it shows you is the patient journey in that top line. They're living, everything's great. They might start to feel weird. And it's like, oh, it's probably just a stomach bug or something. And then there's the moment. And the circles, they're more blue if more people said the same thing. They're less blue if we didn't hear it as much, but we heard it. And then the black circles are just, here's the facts, right? I'm living. It's probably just. Then you look at the middle of it. It worked, it didn't. And then death or continuation. And the biggest blue circle, because our hypothesis we were trying to figure out was, when will people be most likely to consider a cancer clinical trial? Because the thing we were solving for was, currently when we started this project, only 4 to 6% of adults who get cancer do a clinical trial. And if we want to reach the overall goal of the Cancer Moonshot, so the overall goal when we started was cure cancer. Very respectfully, Vice President Biden, we have 11 months. And as much as we would love nothing more than that, that is a very audacious goal. So we tweaked the goal. The goal for Cancer Moonshot was to make 10 years of advances in the next 5. And so in my little corner of that, which was cancer clinical trials, we were like, well, how can we get more than 4 to 6% of adults into clinical trials? And so what this told us by doing the discovery sprint was, the moment that somebody is most likely to consider a cancer clinical trial is the oh shit moment. It's the I could die moment. It's the moment when they're sitting in the doctor's office and they get the cancer diagnosis. Now, when we were presenting this to the vice president in his West Wing office, I debated quoting it exactly versus saying, oh crap. But no, it's a patient quote. So, he was very into this. As you know, he has history of cancer in his family, and his son Bo had passed away. So this is personal for him. And he was very supportive of the work. And so bringing all of these voices and all these lived experiences back to the White House was a game changer for our team. And so this was the final one. Like I said, if you look across the top, it's those moments throughout the cancer journey. And then underneath, it's those powerful quotes is the next line. And then we've got, how did people feel? What did they say? What did they do? And so this is a nice snapshot for anything you're doing. So that holding on to your naivete and, not, let me put it this way. In user experience design, we have a saying, you are not your user, right? So how often have you been working on a project and someone will say, we need to do this. I know it. My mom has cancer. Oh, look at me, I have cancer. But I am not my user. Even though I literally am the user, I've got to go out and talk to people and bring their experiences and their lives into these projects. So for holding on to your naivete, sometimes that means you have to put aside your preconceived notions and let the people speak for what they need. So the method you use here for putting it into action is the journey map and the 5 whys. Materials you'll need are a document for note-taking outputs, pens and paper. Ideally, you saw that big piece of paper I had, so like 17 by 11 is ideal. And if you're all trying to take notes or screenshots, that's wonderful. All these white slides I will provide to the team at Innovate US afterwards to share with you. But do whatever you're doing. Peace. Again, the 18F method cards are invaluable. So they've got the 5 whys on there and they've got the journey mapping. So I think the website's now called 18f.org is the site that they created after the Gov site was shut down. But again, you'll get the links to these. So why are we holding on to our naivete? Why is this important? Well, the 5 whys helps you dig deeper past the first answer and get to richer insights. And then the journey maps, they visualize the thinking, feeling, and doing, which helps you uncover pain points and root causes more efficiently and effectively. So how do you do this? How do you do a journey map? How do you get the people into the room? And this can be done virtually or in person. So you're going to find about 5 people who use the product or service that you work on, and you want to set up 60 minutes with each of them. I know 5 doesn't sound like a lot, but the studies show that even talking to 5 people will uncover, I think it's 80 to 90%, I'd have to look it up, of the problems that you might not even know exist because you're so close to it. So for journey map, you're going to have them give them a blank journey map to fill out. And the blank templates, you can find a million of them online, or you can create your own. You're going to have them walk you through their thoughts. Where it makes sense, ask them why they thought something. And then again, ask why again and again. Another way you can say it is, tell me more, say more. Until you feel like you've gotten to a good root cause. You do want to be thoughtful here because why can put people on the defensive. And then they feel like you're interrogating them versus trying to learn from them. So you don't always have to do 5 is my point. If you feel like you got a root cause, usually go past at least 1. But once you feel like you got the root cause, you can move to the next one. And then you review the final maps. Look for, again, this is going to sound familiar to before. Look for the themes, look for the powerful quotes, write those down. And then, just like I showed a couple slides prior, you're going to take that map that aggregates the story of everybody's journey map into a single visual. Sometimes it'll make sense. Sometimes you might have users that are so different from each other that you'll have a different journey map for each, but you should have a place that tells the story, right? Because that's the thing. The narrative is what's most important. And then again, you're going to hear themes today. Share this with your project team, share it with your department, have a discussion over any changes you might make to your product or your service as a result, right? So if you heard from somebody, this error message makes me feel terrible. Can you soften it up? Can you make it more useful, right? Rather than just an error message, could it be go here to find more resources, right? So that's holding on to your naivete. This is my favorite. This is what I'm known for. Bring the outside in. So lesson 3 in human-centered design is go beyond the expected and ask people in completely different industries for their ideas around a problem. And what does that look like? So a couple ways we did it on Cancer Moonshot was we had a Cancer Moonshot summit about 5 months after we launched. We brought a ton of people into DC to Howard University, and we're talking about nurses, doctors, advocacy groups, support groups, and we all wanted to say, how can we make a decade's worth of progress in the next 5 years? And we wanted them to know that they're here because we believe they can make the biggest difference. And so we broke up into different areas. We had guest speakers. We had breakout sessions where academics spoke with each other. We had breakout sessions where patients and doctors who often didn't talk beyond sitting in a room together, getting the diagnosis, what that might look like. We also had inspiring stories. We had Lieutenant Dr. Craig from the Merthyr Cancer Center out at Walter Reed tell the story about when he started and he came into the cancer center there as the head of the cancer center. He said, well, wait, what do you mean? Tell me what happens with our patients. Because what I'm hearing you say is that the day a patient gets diagnosed, they have to move to 5 different rooms to talk to all the doctors they have to talk to. And he thought that was banana town. He didn't use that word because he's way more professional than me, but it was banana town. And so what he did was he said, nope, the patients are going to stay in one room and the doctors are going to rotate into that room so they can get their plan of action together. And as you can imagine, the doctors revolted and they didn't like that. They were, oh, what do you mean I have to move? This is my office. But what they found and what they saw after a few weeks of doing this, and it eventually became the way, and then everybody was excited about it, the patients and the doctors and the nurses, because it was better for the patient. So, how are you advocating for your users or your constituents or your patients to center them? Because we talk about the methods for human centering, but it's really literally, quite literally, how are you centering the human? And he centered them by keeping them in the same room. So, he told the story that day. This is what it looked like. This was my setup at the summit. So I was running around talking to as many people as possible, collecting as many stories as possible to use in our work. And we also, I worked with the head of digital and we were getting, tweets out and Facebook stories and Cancer Moonshot publication stuff. And this was our digital base. But again, our focus was the story and the narrative, and then inviting people, hey, do you want to participate in some of the research we're doing so we can hear your voice and make sure you're represented? And so it was a wild day, a lot going on, but ultimately really informed the rest of the work we would do. So how do you bring the outside in? The other thing we did for Cancer Moonshot in my swim lane, at least, was a design studio. And so what a design studio is you bring people together. And when I say bring the outside in, we invited people from Pixar. We invited people, we did it in the Bay Area. So we invited people from Pixar, from Stanford, from San Francisco city government, from the user experience community. And what we did, we brought them together for a day of brainstorming, ideating, drawing, so many drawings on posters to answer a question: how might we get people to sign up for clinical trials? And so let me think how I want to do this. I'm going to walk you through how to do it, and then I'm going to share a story. So call me out in chat if I forget to share the story at the end of this. So why is a design studio important? Well, you're going to yield a large amount of data influenced ideas in a short amount of time. And then the other reason it's important is people from different disciplines will bring a different, diverse, and valuable perspective that may not have been considered otherwise. And so, like I said, as you can imagine, if you have all these people coming from these different disciplines and you only ever talk to one kind of person, let's say, in your local area, you're trying to increase relations between the mayor's office and the people. But if you only ever talk to school teachers, then you're only going to have school teachers' opinions, right? Let me check the chat real quick. Okay, you're all wonderful and lovely. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay on your side. You could hear and see everything. So the materials you need for a design studio, any data or research you have related to the design prompt, right? And the design prompt just means the question you're asking everyone to come up with ideas for how to solve. You're going to want pens, markers, Sharpies, Post-it notes, paper. Again, regular size paper is fine. A flip chart or poster paper, and you'll see as we kind of go through the how-to why that's important. Tape, unless you want your facilities department screaming at you, get blue tape if you can, the painter's tape. And then again, those 18F method cards will go into way more detail, but I'm going to give you the high level how-to today. So the first thing you're going to do is invite 10 to 12 people, including users of your product or service. You want to invite stakeholders. The easiest way to get human-centered design to stick is to have the people who make the decisions about what you work on in the room. I know it sounds wild. I promise it works. I've done it in the public sector and the private sector. And you want to have team members too. So you're going to break them into teams of 3 to 4 each, give them the materials, give them the design prompt. Again, ours was how might we get people to sign up for clinical trials? And then what you do is as they have all the materials, they're at their tables, they're going to brainstorm on that. Now, you want to respect introverts and extroverts. So an extrovert is somebody who might be more comfortable shouting out their idea, whereas an introvert might lay back a little because they don't want to be on stage, so to speak. And so what you want to do is have everybody start with their piece of paper. Ooh, there we go. And have them draw their solution or write down their solution. And then have the tables go over them together and to share amongst themselves. Usually a design studio, if you can do all day, great. At least a half a day is good. And again, you'll break these down into probably like 20-minute sections. And the key to a good design studio is the ideas don't have to be perfect. You actually want to tell them to go for quantity over quality at this point. It's called going broad before you go narrow. So just as many ideas as they want, start sketching out on paper. Then as a table, you want to have them narrowed down to one. Or they might doubt, you know what, I like what Tim did on this part of his. I like what Sally did on this part of hers. I like what Ned did on theirs. And maybe you kind of make a Frankenstein. That's okay. It's just the point is to get it out there. So once each team has it, they share with the group, they take the best parts, and then they prototype. Okay, what could the solution look like? Now for this one, how might we get people to sign up for clinical trials? In a surprise to nobody on this workshop call, a lot of people came up with an app. There's an app that could do this. And so we had a lot of people, sketching literally what the app would look like. Once they have a prototype, then the team presents their prototype to a larger group. So they get up, they pick a spokesperson or two, make sure it's, representative of everybody at the table. And they talk through, here's what our solution is. And then instead of positive and deltas, which I feel in my experience of over 20 years of facilitating, positive and deltas kind of lead the witness. I feel like I have to say something great, or I feel like I have to find something negative, and that's rarely useful. So instead, I like using the form of I like, I wish. Here's what I like about what you created. Here's what I wish was there. Here's what I wish was a little different. It just gets people to a better place. And so now you take all that feedback and you go to the next round of, okay, these are the changes we're going to make. So they draw everything, on their prototype again. And so at the end of the day, then you do it again, get feedback, come back, and you come up with a quote unquote final prototype. Now you got, 5 or 6 prototypes that you as the team leading this get to go back and let influence your work from, again, the people who have lived experiences or have a stake in the game. So after you go through the 2 more rounds of deciding feedback, and you get the final prototype, when you take those back, either take pictures, because sometimes the flip chart paper doesn't travel well, but again, share it with your team, see what changes you might want to make. Here's the thing that we did for this particular design studio. When they got to the feedback from the room 3 times, we actually brought in some guests. We had worked with the team at Stanford, and we brought in 6 cancer patients who sat one at each table and gave I like and I wish feedback. Now, here's what we thought was going to happen. We also, by the way, brought folks from the National Cancer Institute with us because we wanted them to experience a design studio, because a lot of what we were doing at Presidential Innovation Fellows, 18F, and US Digital Service, I've been part of all 3 of those over the years. It's not enough that we do human-centered design. It's that we're teaching the people that we're working side by side with in the agencies and the departments to do it with us so that when we're gone, they can continue it. So we brought in folks from the National Cancer Institute, and they were awesome. And when I introduced them, you would have thought I was introducing rock stars. People were hooting and hollering. They thought that was so cool. They got to meet people from NCI. And so, always try to uplift the public servants who are doing the hard work day in and day out. And that was one of my focus areas when I was on it. So we thought we were going to bring in cancer patients. They'd give feedback. They'd leave the room. That's not what happened. They all turned to us, and so did their table mates, and they said, can they stay with us and do the next round 2 of feedback and the next round 3 of feedback? And so it was this beautiful moment. So I think one of the unwritten lessons here that I would share with you all is savor the surprise, which is a saying Scott Cook, who founded Intuit, used to tell us. Sometimes you can have the most rigid plan for a design studio or discovery sprint, and life and people will surprise you. Hey, there's an opportunity to take that in and run with it. And so we let the patients stay, and it was one of the coolest days of my professional life. So that's how you bring the outside in, is just this is one way to do it. There's other ways to do it. When you're creating something, how are you bringing in people that may not normally be brought in, because they will make you think different. The 4th one is design with, not for. So that's lesson number 4. You want to find the humans who will carry out the actual work and involve them early and often. So if you're on a project and you're redesigning the water bill, I don't know why I keep going to the water department, just run with it. But if you're designing the water bill, like bring in the team, bring in the engineers, bring in the designers, bring in the product people, so that they're involved in the beginning. Bring in the bosses. So when you're doing, we'll talk about usability studies in a little bit, bring them in so they're seeing the feedback that the public's giving. So it's not just you putting in a report and they can blow it off. When they see something happen, it's really hard to blow something off, and it really sticks with them. So the example I'll give here is the redesign of trials.cancer.gov. When we got there, I think there was 17 drop-down boxes to fill out, things to check. It was very confusing. As you can see on the screen, there was also not a lot of ways to figure out how to get help if I didn't know what I was doing. So what we did is we did a 7-person usability study, and that's where you put the thing that you create in front of the people who actually use it and see if they can use it. That is the drop dead simple way to explain usability. So again, 17 screens, there's a lot of things to read, there's a lot of things to click on, and there's not a really easy way to figure out how to get help. So we went through and we gave tasks to 7 users. We made sure they were across ages, genders, locations around the country. This was all done virtually, so you can do usability in person, but we did it virtually because we wanted to get a wide swatch of the public. Swatch. Just gonna run with that. But as you can see, this is the final one. We got it down from 17 fields to 3. Before, you had to know the exact name of your cancer in order to get a cancer clinical trial shared back in the search results. Now, what we found was there was 3 thesauruses in the back end that were doing the search when you typed in your cancer type or keyword, and they conflicted and they didn't play well together. So using machine learning and artificial intelligence, we combined them all into one database. We deduped them. We got out all the duplicate ones. And now you could just type in skin cancer and it'll know to pull back melanoma, basal cell, and all these other ones. We wanted you to be able to search by zip codes. We figured our hypothesis was people will know the name of their cancer, even if it's the common law name. They're going to know where they live. They're going to know how old they are. Then when you searched, it made it a lot easier. The other thing you see is we got rid of so much of the noise on the left side of the screen. I'll go back to that for a second. That's all gone. And on the right side of the screen, there's the help. Now, this was a big, passionate discussion, I would say, with the customer call and the customer contact center team. They were like, absolutely not. Previously, this had been all the way at the bottom of the page, and that was by design. And we told them we want to move it to the top. And our hypothesis going in was a learning from a previous company I was at where we knew by bringing it up, it created something called the halo effect. The halo effect is people just need to know that help is there. As long as they can see it, they won't necessarily click on it, but they will know it's there, and that will comfort them to have the confidence to be able to complete the task, which in this case is finding a clinical trial. And the customer contact center said absolutely not. They shut us down. They were like, you cannot put it there. And so then it became a conversation of, well, okay, you're shutting us down because you think it's going to raise your calls astronomically and your chats astronomically. What percentage would it have to go up for you to actually be nervous and it actually have an impact on your numbers? And they were like, wait, what do you mean? I said, oh, but there's got to be a number you're comfortable with. And so they came back to us, and I believe they told us 7%. If our contacts and calls and chats go up by more than 7%, you've got to move it down. I was like, great. And I want to say it might have gone up 4%. So we were all happy. So it did go up a little, but it didn't go up enough that it was a worry for them. And it ended up, again, human-centered design, it made for a better user experience. And so, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but it was a resounding success because we put tracking on the page to know how we were doing. The percentage of people from this search page to the search results page went up maybe double digits. From the search results page to an individual clinical trial page went up. Satisfaction went up, abandonment went down. And so again, because we based this, we used some of the data from that discovery sprint we conducted, but because we did a usability study, we were able to support this with data and ultimately design something that was best for the users and easy for them to use. So designing with, not for, we brought them into the room with us and said, tell us how you experience this. So the method is a usability study. If it's virtual, you can do video chat, Zoom or equivalent. You just need internet access. If in person, you can do it on a laptop or a computer. Again, internet access. Sometimes you do these on paper. There's a wide variety available. You want to have a document for note taking. Again, you're going to listen for those powerful quotes. And then again, if you want to go out to the 18F methods cards, there's a whole section in there how to do usability. So why do we do it? Why is usability important? Basically, getting your product or service in front of the people who use it is one of the best ways to find out if it works and where you can make improvements. I worked on a product 10 years ago where it was so clear to the product team, including the designers, the engineers, and the stakeholders, the logout button's right there. The logout button is right there. And in usability, Not a single user could find the logout button because it wasn't where they were trained for it to be in most places. So sometimes a team will want to be a little clever and move something around, but if it's not matching up with the mental model, meaning the way somebody thinks about something, then it's doing nobody any good. And so to have, everybody who fought against me to move the login button saying we're not moving it, we're not moving it, and then to see people not be able to find it was the most powerful way to get the point across. So that's why we want to involve the stakeholders and the team members into these studies. So how do you do it? You find, again, 5 people who use the product service, set up 60 minutes with each, have them open or go to your service and give them a task to complete. So for example, and you don't want to say like login, because then they'll just look for the login button, click it. But you might say, how would you get into your account? Okay. Observe what they do and where they go, take notes, right? If they're searching around a lot, if it's not easy for them, like, oh, users not able to find it. And then once they're in there doing it, ask them to think out loud while they're doing it so you can take notes on that. So if just quiet while they're doing it, you don't know what they're thinking. So just, and it's not natural to think out loud, so get them to do it. And then once they're done, they might be successful, they might not. And you'll see in the usability link here that, you're going to have a pretty standard script you follow with people. Hey, we're not here to judge you. We're here to judge the system. So you want to make people comfortable talking out loud. But you don't want to give them hints as they're going along. You don't want to tell them what to do. Otherwise, you defeat the purpose of the study. But then once they're done, that's when you can ask questions for clarification. Hey, it seemed like you were hesitant here. What was going through your mind? And let them kind of tell you that. Oh, my bad. And then again, here it is again. Share the results with your project team, create a plan to make any needed changes. I'm just not going to lie to you. I'm not the biggest fan of doing a 40-page detailed usability study report. Just share enough to get your point across, screenshots, powerful quotes, and then your recommendations for the team going forward. Okay, lesson 5. This is the hard-fought one. Tech is not hard at the end of the day, humans are. If we were in person, I would be listening for you to be chuckling right now. I'm going to imagine you're chuckling in chat and wherever you are, because this is pretty obvious, but it's not. People think there's so many reasons technology doesn't allow us to do things. And in my lived experience, it's really the humans who make it hard. So let's talk a minute about the what and the how. This is a GIF from a TV show called Game of Thrones. And in it, the woman who should have been queen, but the writers took a dog leg with her character in the final 3 episodes of the whole series, and we're not going to get into that. There was somebody who was fighting her. And in this, the person says, well, we're going to be able to beat you. And she's like, no, you're not. And he's like, oh, I'm bringing my entire army. We're going to be able to beat you. And she's like, good luck with that. So what they do in this scene is they set up this entire army. And she's like, great, you put your army all in one spot. And she sends her dragon out, and the dragon obliterates all of them. This is the what and the how. So the what is the results you achieve. So maybe you delivered your project early. Maybe you delivered it under budget, right? But the how is how you treat the team and your path to getting to those results. So if nobody ever want to work with you again because you were a jerk to everybody and you're mean or you're unrealistic or you're just not a good team player, then no one's going to want to work with you again. So, while the tech can be hard, don't be the human that's difficult. So think about how you treat people along the way, because otherwise, you don't want to be the person that comes and just necessarily burns everybody on the path to those amazing results that I know you're all capable of. And so that's the really bringing the human part into it. The 6th lesson here is you can be nice and still get stuff done. And I'll let that sink in for a minute. You can be nice and still get stuff done. You don't have to be the person yelling. You don't have to be the person beating others down. It doesn't have to be that way. This is the number one lesson I took away from working for President Obama and Vice President Biden and then President Biden is you can be kind to other people. This is literally my favorite GIF on the internet, right? Like, there doesn't have to be a world in which people are made to feel less than or people are made to feel gaslit. This has been something that's been important to me my entire career, is treating people with respect and making them feel valued. And in some cases that might look like, that might look like making sure that as milestones are hit, you are letting people know, whether it's a note, whether it's a thank you, whether it's recognition at an all hands or in a newsletter that your boss sends out to the whole team or department. That also goes to you as leaders in making sure that you understand how people like to be recognized, right? And so if Tom would be mortified by getting a shout out on all hands, maybe it's just a note from the boss that you have the boss send to him saying, great job, right? And then at the end of your projects, making sure you have a celebration where you celebrate all the good work. It's not just, oh, the project ended, let's move on to the next one. It's like, whoa, 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 let's gather the humans together. Let's celebrate their accomplishments. Let's talk to them about how much they were valued and appreciated for getting this very important service or project out to the public. So here's the 6 lessons brought again. Humanize the effort, hold on to your naivete. You want to bring the outside in. You want to design with, not for. You want to know or just remember that, tech isn't hard at the end of the day, the humans are, and that you can be nice and still get stuff done. So that was at the federal level. I do want to bring in an example from the state level. So I was called up on March 21st of 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic up into the governor's office. I was living in San Francisco at the time. And so March 21, I got the call saying, we need your help. Can you come up? Are you healthy? Are you okay? And I said, yes. So 2 days later on Monday, March 23rd, I got in my car. I drove to Sacramento. And for the next 100 days, no days off, as many of you who work in, I saw some California SAC folks. I'm going to assume you work state. If not, God bless you for living where it's 106 degrees in May. But I was brought in initially because of my community and organizing abilities. I was brought in to be the liaison between the governor's office and each of the mayor's offices. So there's a group in California called the 13 mayors, and it's the 13 largest cities in California. We have 39 million people. We have very large cities. We also have very rural areas, as this graph tells you. But what we realized in those first few days was it doesn't matter as much to get the liaison to the mayor's office as it does to the public health officials, right? Because they're the ones making the calls in a pandemic. And so I was pivoted and it was like, okay, we don't need to be that liaison to the mayor's people. We do need data though. So we had hospital data, we had death data, we had bed data. Then there was this other group called NPIs, or non-pharmaceutical interventions. And they needed somebody to figure out what is the story with how people are moving around, where they're going, and what they're doing. And so I got a cross-functional team together across about 5 departments in the state of California, Department of Technology, Health and Human Services, and a few others. And we created this data insights working group. And I said, okay, well, we can send a briefing book up to the governor every day that tells the story of the non-hospital and non-death data. So that was the NPI, non-pharmaceutical interventions. I had the team, we looked at dozens of data points to figure out how to tell the story. And where we landed was about 5. And so it was traffic data. We could tell from the sensors on the highways, how many cars every day? Are there more cars? Are there less cars? Then we had this one, which was, are people moving around? And so what most people don't know is with your Facebook data at the time, if you've got location services on, Facebook knows where you're going. And there was a public API and they were able to tell where things were. And so what this told us was if people aren't moving more than 600 yards, that's generally someone's house. Great. So people staying home or people moving. Now, the thing you've got to remember with data is it doesn't always tell the same story. So for some of these are the California counties for every county in California. We could have looked at this and been like, oh, wow, Shasta, they're moving a lot. We should see what's going on in Shasta. No, what you got to know about Shasta is it's a very rural county. So whereas with San Francisco, you might go to a mile to the grocery store, they might have to go 20 miles. So they are going to move more. So we're not going to just look at the data and freak out because people are moving. And the other thing with this one is, when are they moving? And, we could look at this and we could tell by weekend, we could tell by day. And of the 58 counties in California, again, which ones are the important ones if they're moving a lot and which ones aren't? These are some highlights from my Instagram stories. I cried the 3rd day of working on the pandemic. I was on a call. So what we did is, as the head of the insights team, and I should disclose, in a volunteer capacity, I was not a state employee. There was a few of us who went up as volunteers. We had a call every day, every morning, with the innovation teams around the country, and some folks internationally would dial in, and we would just share our stories and what are we seeing and how are we telling the stories through the data. And so we did all that. And I don't know if you all remember the story, but there was a ship available, a Navy ship, and they were trying to decide if it was going to go to Seattle or Los Angeles. And that particular day, Seattle and Los Angeles were on the call with us, and we were all just sharing. I was talking about the briefing book and how we were going to brief the senior leadership team and the governor and his chief of staff. And it was on that call that the notification came across that one of the cities did not get the ship, and the other one did. And so I just, I took off, came off video, went off the call, and I just cried a lot. And one of my colleagues who had gone up with me, DJ Patil, he was like, get it out of your system because it's going to happen more. And he was right. I just share that because it's okay to have emotions about a lot of the work you're doing and that we're doing, because it is hard. And in some cases, it's life or death. And so it's okay to have emotions. The second one here was the first weekend. I reached out to the head of epidemiology, and I was like, hey, Adam, do you have any, because we were creating the briefing book just to go to the governor's team, but there's also, I would imagine other people were going to read it, right? And so I said, do you have anything around like field epidemiology manual and comms communications? So I read that on, Wednesday night. I also made the questionable or smart, but more questionable decision of about a week in, I watched the movie Contagion. It felt more like a documentary at that point, oddly enough, but I just, again, that bring the outside in. I was like, there's a lot of parallels here. So let me watch it and see if there's anything that will inspire me to think different. But it was a very odd thing to watch as this was happening, because it did, I'm not trying to be a smart ass. Like it did feel a little like a documentary at that point. And then the last thing is, and I acknowledge all of you working in government. I appreciate you. I acknowledge the long hours, the hard work, the low pay in a lot of instances. This really got driven home, even though I had worked in the White House. So this really got driven home during the pandemic. Like I said, it was 100 days straight with no days off. But my first 11:30 night, so we'd start at 6:30 in the morning with our daily stand up, and then at night we'd have to be available to the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Not have to be available. We wanted to be available to help him with his prep for the governor's briefing the next day, because he often had to make appearances, and he would usually use that graph that I used on the previous slide. And so we were out in the State Emergency Operations Center in, oh gosh, SAC people help me here. It's right outside of Sacramento, towards Tahoe. I'm blanking on the name because of course I am. But this is the first late night, and it really hit home the importance of the work we were doing and how many people were counting on us to do it well. And so when I think about human-centered design, the other thing I want to drive home with you, this usually applies more to the private sector and companies than it does to government employees. But even government now is getting more into metrics and what does success look like. And, in the private sector, there's OKRs, key results, and people want results now. And what I just want to share with you is sometimes it might be years until you find out the results and the impact your work has had. And I want you to know that that's okay too, right? We want to get results now. We want to know things are going well, but sometimes it's okay to take a deep breath and sit down and just remember that sometimes there are long, long tails on a lot of this work. The story I'll end with was I was on an airplane once, about 2 years after I left the Obama White House. So about 2 years after I left the Cancer Moonshot. And a woman sitting next to me, she was a talker. She was a talker. I had my earphones on, but she wanted to talk. And so she said, oh, I'm just coming back from DC. I said, oh, okay. She goes, I really wish Joe Biden had more time to work on Cancer Moonshot. Are you familiar with it? And I paused and I debated, do I say yes and, tell the story, or do I not? And I ultimately, I felt her emotion. I said, yeah, I actually work on the team. And her eyes got really big. And she said, I just wish he had more time. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, when my husband died from cancer, I started a caretaker support group, and we've just not had hope since he left office because the Cancer Moonshot stopped. And this was about 2019. So this was before it started back up on the most recent Biden-Harris White House. I said, actually, it did continue on. We had built it out in a way, much like Hydra, that if one head got chopped off, the other still survived. We spread it over 7 agencies so that the work could keep going. And her face lit up. She started crying. And she said, before I got on this plane, I didn't have hope. She said, thank you for all you do. I have hope now. And I can't wait to go back to my group and tell them that it continued on. And then another year later, I'm at a conference and I'm on a panel and I'm talking about it's a cancer panel. I'm talking about the moonshot. And this doctor interrupts me. Oh, thank you for that line. That looks beautiful. This doctor interrupts me. He said, wait, you worked on Cancer Moonshot. Were you part of that team that redid trials.cancer.gov? I said, yeah, I had the honor of leading that work, actually. And he said, I never used to be able to look at that website and it was not usable. He goes, now I get to sit next to my patients every day in the room and find trials that are eligible for them. So 2 and 3 years after I had left the work, I still hear the stories because the universe decides to put those in my way. So think about that. Think about that in your work. When people ask why I raised my hand to work on Cancer Moonshot, I tell them, much what the vice president did. I want to make it so that mom can see her grandbaby being born. I want to see that dad walk his daughter down the aisle. I want to make sure that person gets to see one more sunset. So that's why I raised my hand for this work. And that's why it's meaningful to me. And it's meaningful to me to talk